It was a warm Sunday morning in Atlanta when everything unraveled. I had just stepped out of Mount Olive Baptist Church, still humming the last note of the choir's benediction. I wore a light blue blazer and held a leather Bible my grandmother had passed down to me, the same Bible I carried every Sunday since I was old enough to walk. The parking lot was packed, filled with elders in pastel hats and kids racing to their parents' cars. That's when I heard it, the screech of tires and a patrol car pulling up across the curb. A tall white officer, badge shining and jaw clenched, stepped out and pointed in my direction. "You. Ma'am, I need to see some ID." "Now," he barked. Confused, I paused mid-step. "Excuse me?" "You match a description," he said. "Please don't make this difficult." There was no description given. No explanation. No courtesy. I calmly asked, "Officer, what exactly is going on?" "I just came out of church." He didn't respond with clarity. Instead, his hand went to his belt. And within 30 seconds, he was pushing me up against the back of his cruiser, slapping on cold steel cuffs in front of the entire congregation. Gasps. Phones raised. A deacon shouted, "That's Miss Hamilton. She's a federal attorney." The officer paused, just briefly, but it was too late. His face was already on half a dozen live streams. "I'll sort it out at the station," he muttered as he pushed me into the back seat. He didn't know yet that the name Danielle Hamilton carried more weight in Washington than most senators. And he definitely didn't know what was coming next. The drive to the precinct was tense and silent. He didn't say another word. I sat in the back seat, my wrists stiff in the cuffs, watching the city blur past the window. I could hear the static from his radio, but his hands stayed tight on the wheel. He never once looked back. At the precinct, the front desk clerk glanced up as he brought me in. Her eyes widened immediately. Officer Kemp, you might want to double-check," she matched the description. "Interfering with an ongoing investigation. Trespassing. Possible fraud," he said coldly, shoving the arrest form across the desk. The woman didn't argue, but her face said everything. Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward a photograph pinned behind the glass. It was my photo. My professional headshot. Framed. Right next to the U.S. Attorney's Office seal. "You arrested Danielle Hamilton," she whispered under her breath. He froze. I turned to him. Calm. Controlled. "You really didn't check who I was before you dragged me out of a church." He blinked, for the first time unsure of himself. You said nothing." "I didn't, I asked you what was going on. You chose to escalate." The silence around the lobby grew heavy. Officers and clerks nearby were listening now. The woman at the desk tapped a few keys, pulled up my DOJ credentials, and turned the screen toward him. "Sir, she's not just an attorney. She's a federal prosecutor. She lectures on civil rights law at Georgetown. And she's scheduled to speak at the Capitol on Wednesday." Officer Kemp's mouth parted slightly. A shade of panic crept into his voice. "I didn't know. I thought she was." "You thought wrong," I said, cool and quiet. His hand hovered near the paperwork, as if wishing he could make it disappear. But it was already too late. The station phone started ringing. My phone, still in the bag they took, was being flooded. The incident had already gone viral. And somewhere in Washington, my boss, the U.S. Deputy Attorney General, had just picked up the call. They uncuffed me within minutes. Officer Kemp's hands were shaking as he removed the restraints, but he couldn't meet my eyes. The room had gone awkwardly silent. A few officers stood nearby, clearly aware this was spiraling beyond control. The desk clerk handed me my phone and belongings. "Miss Hamilton, ma'am, you're free to go." We're so sorry about all this." I didn't say anything. Not yet. I checked my phone. There were already 47 missed calls, dozens of texts, and 3 voicemails from names that would make any politician sit up straight, U.S. attorneys, senior DOJ officials, even one from a White House extension. But one call was already in progress. And it wasn't mine. Across the room, behind the frosted glass door marked Commanding Officer, I could hear muffled shouting. A supervisor had just finished a call with Washington. The door opened. A thick-necked captain stepped out and walked directly toward Kemp. "Officer Kemp. In my office. Now." "But sir, now." Kemp followed, pale and stiff. The door slammed behind them. I sat down quietly on the bench near the exit. I wasn't in a hurry. The internet was already doing its work. A young officer walked past me slowly, paused, then turned back. "Ma'am, if I may, you handled that better than anyone I've ever seen." I looked at him and gave a faint nod. He added softly, "Word is. Internal Affairs is on their way." "Good." Outside the precinct, local news vans were already pulling up. Someone had leaked the footage, the church, the handcuffs, the shouting. The headline was brutal: "Woman arrested leaving church, turns out she's a federal prosecutor." But that wasn't the worst part. The clip was now trending on every platform, with a new tag catching fire, hashtag "She taught the law." By the time I stepped outside the station, the world had already shifted. A crowd had formed, church members, journalists, law students, and strangers holding their phones high, narrating every move I made. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, but I knew how to carry it. Shoulders back. Eyes forward. Silent. "Ms. Hamilton. Is it true you were mistaken for a suspect leaving church? Did the officer know who you were? Are you pressing charges? Is it true you lecture at the FBI Academy?" I didn't answer. "Not here. Not yet." I slipped into the black sedan that had arrived to pick me up, not an Uber, but a federal vehicle with a familiar face at the wheel, Special Agent Micah Leary, DOJ liaison and an old friend. He didn't even say hello. Just handed me a manila envelope. "That officer's name is everywhere. His department's trying to get ahead of it. But DC isn't happy." "I figured," I replied calmly, flipping through the printed screenshots of media reports, statements, and, most notably, a tweet from a prominent senator, a federal civil rights attorney, arrested in front of her church, without cause. If she wasn't recognized, she might still be in a cell. This must be addressed immediately. Senator Eliana Rowe, Judiciary Committee. Micah spoke without looking away from the road. "They want you to come in tonight. Closed-door meeting with the Deputy AG. Press wants a statement, too. And your lecture at Howard tomorrow? Standing room only. Everyone's talking about it." I exhaled slowly. Hashtag "She taught the law" is trending on every platform, he added. Even the president's aide retweeted it. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest anymore. It was turning into a symbol. A legal educator, wrongly cuffed outside her own sanctuary, now elevated by the very law she spent her life teaching. Micah glanced in the rearview mirror. "By the way, that officer. Kemp. He's been placed on administrative leave as of 30 minutes ago. Internal Affairs has opened a full review." I nodded, steady. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And we were just getting started. That evening, I walked into the Department of Justice headquarters through the east entrance, the one they reserve for high-level staff and urgent meetings. No media. No flashing lights. Just marble walls, silent corridors, and the weight of something shifting beneath the surface. The Deputy Attorney General, Margaret Linwood, stood as I entered her conference room. She didn't waste time. "Danielle," she said, eyes sharp behind her glasses, "first, are you okay?" I gave a slow nod. "Physically, yes. Legally? That's still developing." She gestured to the seat across from her. Good. Because this is more than about you now. It's about precedent. About what happens when a federal civil rights prosecutor is detained without cause in plain sight of the public. She slid a folder across the table. We're initiating an oversight review of the Atlanta Metro Police Department. The officer in question, Kemp, has had 2 prior complaints that never reached your desk. Internal Affairs missed them, or ignored them. I opened the folder. 2 separate civilians. Similar accusations. Both buried. Suppressed by the precinct chain of command, she said quietly. The DOJ is authorizing a task force audit, and I want you to be the face of it. I looked up. You want me to lead the probe? Margaret nodded. You've earned it. You lived it. There was a pause. I took a breath. I'll do it, I said. But before we left the room, she added something that hit deeper than anything else. You're not just the prosecutor this city needs right now. You're the reminder that law is supposed to protect people, not just control them. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, a former Supreme Court clerk. Just saw the footage. Proud of you. Let me know if you need national support. They messed with the wrong woman. I stared at the screen. Not in anger. Not in victory. But with purpose. Because tomorrow, I'd stand before a sea of students at Howard Law School. And I wouldn't just teach the law anymore. I'd be the case they studied. The next morning, the atmosphere at Howard Law School was electric. What was supposed to be a quiet seminar had exploded into a campus-wide event. The auditorium was packed. Students lined the aisles, faculty filled the balcony, and journalists disguised as alumni loitered in the back. I stood behind the podium in a tailored gray suit. No blazer today. Just sleeves rolled slightly, my mother's gold bracelet on one wrist, and the scars from the cuffs still faintly red on the other. I didn't use a teleprompter. Didn't need one. Good morning, I began, letting my voice settle in the stillness. My name is Danielle Hamilton. You know that by now. A few soft laughs, a few knowing nods. Yesterday morning, I was placed in handcuffs outside my church. I had committed no crime. I was not questioned. I was not warned. I was simply told I matched a description. No one moved. Many of you came here to study the law. To learn how it works. But I'm here to tell you something else, knowing the law doesn't always protect you. Teaching it doesn't always shield you. Sometimes, you have to become the living reminder of why the law exists at all. The room was silent. Not out of discomfort, out of power. I walked around the podium. The officer who arrested me didn't ask a single question about who I was. And it didn't matter that I had credentials, titles, or a record of service. What mattered was control. And that, my students, is where the law meets its greatest test. A young woman in the front row was already crying. This isn't just a lesson in civil procedure. This is about accountability. About the burden we carry when the system trusts us to uphold it, and the danger when others abuse it. I paused. You've seen the hashtag. Hashtag she taught the law. But this is bigger than a moment on a screen. It's a movement now. And I need each of you to remember this moment, not for me, but for the day someone stands in front of you, cuffed without reason, looking for someone who understands the law, and has the spine to fight for it. The room erupted. Not in cheers, but in a long, standing ovation, raw, honest, and unified. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't just about my arrest anymore. It was about changing the culture that allowed it to happen. By the afternoon, Officer Kemp's world had already started crumbling. The internal review went public faster than expected. A DOJ press release confirmed that a federal investigation into the Atlanta Metro Police Department had been opened, with Officer Nathan Kemp placed on indefinite unpaid suspension pending outcome. More damning, however, were the body cam leaks. Two clips surfaced online. One showed the exact moment he approached me in the church parking lot, cold, dismissive, and abrupt, with no radio confirmation or warrant. The second clip, even more damaging, featured Kemp muttering to a fellow officer earlier that morning, "These Sunday crowds, man. Always someone acting suspicious." No specific threat. No incident report filed prior. Just vague assumptions captured on record. The city's mayor held an emergency press conference. She didn't name him directly, but her tone was clear: when public trust in law enforcement is shaken by unlawful actions, we must act swiftly and without hesitation. No one is above accountability, not even those in uniform. By the time the evening news aired, Kemp's name was being discussed on national panels. Legal experts, former prosecutors, even former officers were all weighing in. One anchor read from his personnel file, recently unsealed, 2 prior civilian complaints, both unresolved. 1 internal warning for procedural overreach. The camera cut to my photo mid-segment. And then to the now infamous headline, "She teaches the law, but he never asked her name." But while the media storm raged, I sat quietly in my office that night, reviewing files of other misconduct claims buried by the system. Kemp was the spark, but he wasn't the only one. Dozens of names. Dozens of families. And now, they were finally being heard. My inbox flooded with messages: "Thank you for standing up. My son went through the same thing, no one believed us. Because of you, we're reopening our complaint." I stared at my screen, more determined than ever. Kemp had tried to silence one woman. Instead, he amplified 100 more. 3 days later, I was back in D.C., sitting across from 2 senior DOJ officials and 1 member of the Civil Rights Division's oversight panel. The tone of the meeting was different this time, not reactive, but strategic. "Danielle," one of them said, adjusting his tie, "we don't want this to be a one-off. This needs to set a precedent." I agreed. A draft was already on the table, a new directive mandating mandatory cross-agency checks before any arrest of a civilian on public property, especially houses of worship, schools, or civic centers. But more importantly, it included a clause I had written myself: any detainment involving legal professionals, civil servants, or government employees must trigger an automatic verification procedure, an immediate review if rights are suspected to have been infringed. It wasn't just about me. It was about preventing the next wrongful arrest, whether that person had a title or not. One of the officials nodded slowly. "You've sparked something bigger than policy, Danielle. You've reminded the public that professionalism and profiling don't mix, and when they do, careers collapse." Another leaned forward. "The officer? Kemp? He's lawyered up. But the state bar is already looking into the local prosecutor who failed to flag his behavior last year. We think more heads may roll." I didn't smile. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was clarity. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about restoration. The law isn't about fear. It's about fairness." They were silent for a moment, then both nodded in full agreement. As I stepped out of the DOJ building that evening, I saw a young woman waiting by the front steps. She was holding a folder and wearing a school badge that read Georgetown Pre-Law Fellowship. She looked nervous as I approached. "Ms. Hamilton," she said. I saw everything that happened. I just wanted you to know. I changed my major last week. I want to study constitutional law. Because of you." I paused. Then smiled softly. "Good. We need more of you." Because this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a movement. The next week, I was invited to testify at a closed-door congressional roundtable, not as a victim, but as an expert. The Capitol room was thick with tension. Lawmakers from both parties sat quietly as I recounted the event in full: the unwarranted arrest, the lack of protocol, the aftermath, and the public outcry. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. Ms. Hamilton, one congresswoman asked, tapping her pen against a yellow notepad, "You're saying that even your status didn't protect you?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "And if someone with DOJ clearance can be treated that way, imagine what happens daily to those without credentials, without a platform, those who can't live stream or speak in front of Congress." The room went silent. One senator, a former prosecutor himself, leaned forward and said, "This incident, it's exposing cracks many of us have long ignored." "Not cracks," I corrected him. "Patterns." The moment landed hard. That day, 3 members of the Judiciary Committee pledged public support for a new bill, one modeled after the very policies we drafted in my DOJ meeting. It included funding for independent civilian review boards and precincts nationwide, body cam footage release mandates, and expanded federal audits of repeated use of force violations. But behind the policy, something more powerful was shifting: narrative. Because for once, the country wasn't just watching a scandal play out. They were seeing someone fight back with the system, not against it. The arrest had been a mistake. But what followed? That was deliberate. Every law school, every policy student, every department head now had a new case study. And as reporters waited outside for a statement, one asked, "Ms. Hamilton, what would you say to Officer Kemp if you saw him again?" I paused before answering. "I'd say this: you reminded the country what happens when authority is used recklessly. And I reminded them what it looks like when it's used right." It had been exactly 30 days since the arrest. The story that began with handcuffs outside a church had evolved into something far greater, a conversation stretching from newsrooms to classrooms to courtroom benches nationwide. Officer Nathan Kemp officially resigned from the Atlanta Metro Police Department after being served with a civil suit, a DOJ complaint, and a formal ethics review by the state's Peace Officer Standards Commission. No badge. No pension. No more silence. Meanwhile, the federal oversight initiative I helped design was renamed the Hamilton Accountability Protocol, a set of guidelines adopted by 3 major metropolitan precincts and under review by 7 more. I didn't ask for my name to be attached. But they said it was only right. That same day, I walked past the church steps where it all began. The sun was shining, same light, same breeze, but the air felt different. Lighter. The congregation welcomed me back with hugs, firm handshakes, and a simple banner that read, "Welcome home, Danielle, still teaching the law." I stepped to the podium once more, this time not as a victim or a headline, but as a living example of what justice can look like when it's faced head-on. After the service, an elderly man with a cane approached. "You didn't let it break you," he said. "No, sir," I smiled. "It built something new." I turned to leave, pausing at the curb where the patrol car had once blocked my path. This time, no sirens. No confrontation. Just quiet resolve. Because now, when people think of that Sunday, they don't just remember the cuffs. They remember what came after. They remember the fight, the fire, and the woman who taught the law, and lived it. Weeks turned into months, but the story didn't fade. Instead, it matured, growing beyond viral clips and trending hashtags into concrete change. Universities began using the footage of my arrest in legal ethics courses. Police academies integrated my DOJ directives into their training modules. And I was invited to speak at the National Civil Rights Summit, not as a keynote, but as a case study in reform. Yet I never let the attention change me. I still returned to church every Sunday. Same pew. Same community. The difference now was subtle, not in how they treated me, but in how they saw themselves. As if my stand reminded them that dignity wasn't something you earn, it's something you defend, especially when it's threatened. Then one day, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a simple note: I thought I knew what authority meant. I didn't. Watching what happened changed that. I've resigned. I'm starting over. And I'm learning the law the right way this time. There was no name signed. But I didn't need one. Because even in silence, I recognized the weight of those words. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a start. And that, in its own quiet way, meant more than any court ruling ever could. Because legacies aren't built in courtrooms. They're built in how we respond, not to power, but to its misuse. And if one unjust arrest could inspire a nationwide shift, then maybe justice didn't begin in the courtroom after all. Maybe it began, right there on the sidewalk, when I chose to stand. 6 months later, I stood inside a different courtroom, this time, not as a defendant, not even as a speaker. I had been nominated for a seat on the Federal Civil Oversight Board, and the Senate confirmation hearing was my final step. A senator across the bench asked, "Ms. Hamilton, after everything you've been through, the wrongful arrest, the investigation, the public pressure, what makes you believe reform is still possible?" I didn't hesitate. Because I lived the failure of the system, I said. But I also lived the recovery. Justice isn't just a word in a courtroom, it's a choice. A daily one. Another senator leaned in. "And if confirmed, what's the first thing you do?" I answered with the same quiet force I'd carried since that Sunday morning outside the church, "I'll make sure the law doesn't just protect those who understand it, but also those who have no voice, no camera, and no one watching when the cuffs come out." That answer made headlines again. But I didn't care about the headlines anymore. What mattered was the vote. 3 days later, it passed, 94-6. I was sworn in the following week. Now, when I walk into a courtroom, people don't whisper about what happened to me. They stand up, not because of a scandal, but because of what I became after it. A former DOJ civil rights prosecutor. A survivor of wrongful arrest. And now, a federal official ensuring that no one else is ever dragged from a church sidewalk without reason. Not because there's someone important. But because everyone is.